This morning, we're going to be looking at John chapter 19. And for the English ministry, we've been going through the book of John, it seems like for a long while. So it has been, but we're getting near the end. But today's sermon, the passage actually kind of really relates to what we talked about last week. If you're all here last week in the main sanctuary, we talked about anxiety, we talked about worry, and how really the wrong questions can lead us to worry and anxiety, and how the answer is not finding out how do I answer all these questions that I have in my life, but knowing that Jesus Christ, who loves you, knows all the answers. And so that's what we talked about last week a little bit, just in a nutshell. But today, we're going to be looking at another aspect of anxiety and worry, which is fear. And I think this is a passage that, if you're reading the Bible, you can kind of pass by because it doesn't seem to have a lot of meat. It just seems like, oh, here's a couple of guys who embalmed Jesus' body and put him in a tomb. In other words, I don't know if you've ever been to a funeral. Hopefully the other ones you haven't had the opportunity to do that. But I've been to many funerals over my life. And usually what it is that the whole part of, I don't want to get too gross, when I was in seminary, actually, they don't do this anymore in seminary. I talked to Pastor Einstein, they don't do it anymore. But in my seminary, they actually took us to a funeral home as part of our training as pastors. And we got to see the cadavers, and we actually saw some of the funeral directors doing, not the embalming, some of them do it, but the dressing up and putting the makeup. And I don't know if you guys know, but the people who are dead, they put makeup because you have a very strange pallor, and it still looks strange. And then the family brings in clothes, and they actually clothe them, unless the family wants to do it. And most families don't want to clothe their loved ones. And so he asked us, do you guys want to do it? And I just did it. We might have to do this in the future, so just saw all kinds of things. It's stuff that's behind the scenes. You don't see them prepared, and you also don't see them after the graveside funeral service going into the ground. It's all the people that are on the side that do that. And so when you look at John chapter 19, there's this little story of how Jesus' body was prepared for burial and actually put into a tomb. And it's behind the scenes. It's something that we never think about. It's something that's not normal course of our life kinds of things. And so that's what's going on here in John chapter 19. But it's fascinating because John presents it in his gospel because there's something really important going on here in the hearts of the men who do it. So that's what I want to share with you this morning. I'm going to be squinting a lot today. I forgot to bring my glasses from the car and I didn't have a chance to run out and get it. And so if I'm slower or misreading, it's because of my eyesight. John chapter 19, just a few verses 38 through 42. John 19, verses 38 through 42. So after Jesus is crucified and he's dead, it says this in verse 38. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus. And Pilate gave him permission. So he came and took away his body. Nicodemus also, who earlier had come to Jesus by night, came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds in weight. So they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen cloth with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid. So because of the Jewish day of preparation, since the tomb was close at hand, they laid Jesus there. Let's pray this morning as we read the word of God. Father, I just pray that you'd help us to understand your word. Some things we can kind of pass by, but Lord, there's things that we can have insight into. And so I pray that you would help us to learn from Joseph, help us to learn from Nicodemus what's going on in their hearts, and how we might respond when we're afraid. And we're afraid of what others might think or what others might do. That applies to all of us. Thank you again for your word. We pray in Jesus' precious name. There was a guy named Fraser Kent, and he wrote a book back in the 70s, a long time ago, was reborn. He wrote a book called Nothing to Fear, and in it, he had this kind of opening introduction, and he said, we live in a world full of fears, and we name them all. And so some of the things that he put in there were just kind of strange, but let me teach you guys some new words. There's a fear called, oh man, this is kind of a weird one, chitophobia. Chitophobia. That's the fear of people with lots of hair on their body. There's another one. I know, that's kind of sad, right? You guys might be able to figure this one out. It's called odontophobia. Can you guess what that is? Fear of teeth, especially that have fallen out from people's mouth. There's another one that's called, I don't want to get to that one quite here. There's another one called, and some of these are hard to pronounce. Okay, let me make sure I'm doing this right. I'm squinting down too. Thalassophobia. Thalassophobia. You know what that's the fear of? Thalassophobia? It's the fear of sitting down, so none of you have it. Maybe me, I don't know. There's another one. And I'm sure you guys are all good with this one. Platophobia. Fear of baldness and bald people. Why is that one funny? I don't understand. Some of those things we can laugh at because they're like, how ridiculous, how silly. You know, in life, you know what some of the silliest fears are? It's the fear of what other people might think. And it's the fear of what other people might do that are often unfounded or that actually control you to make decisions that are stupid or foolish. So in this little passage, we have Joseph of Arimathea, we have Nicodemus. And both of them are feared of the status quo. They're afraid of the ones in power. They're afraid of not fitting in. They're afraid of being stripped of social, economic, political, any of those things. Their fear of being ostracized is in battle with their faith, with what they believe in, or at least they say that they believe in. This is something that all of us are going to struggle with at some point. But the thing that I love about this story is not only how real it is, but the fact that they're able to overcome, at least to a small degree, the fear they have of what others might do to them and what others think about them. It's not something phenomenal. What we find here is, first of all, a guy named Joseph of Arimathea. He comes to Pilate at night asking for the remains of Jesus, and he comes at night, the Bible says, because he's afraid of the Jews. And he asks Pilate for the body. Here's the tension that we have. He knows that Jesus is someone that blessed him mightily. He knows that he's a follower and that he probably had some dialogue with Jesus Christ. We just don't know it from the Gospels. We don't know it, but he had a relationship with Jesus Christ. To say that he was a disciple back in that day, in the New Testament day, means that he had a relationship with him. It's like if someone you knew, someone you cared about, your family member, your friend, they died and there was a funeral and you chose not to go because you were afraid of what others might do or think about you attending that. Did you ever have that kind of experience? I had a friend in high school who was not very popular, but now, I mean, he's been phenomenal in his life, and he's just a great guy. But I remember he had a party. He wanted to have a party. And he invited all the people that he thought were his friends. And the sad part was only a handful of people showed up. I showed up. I was kind of a nerd. So, you just go, right, when you get invited to a party. But the sad part was, I think he invited over 30 people. And he had it all decked out. He had his parents kicked out. They went off on a date somewhere and they were gone. They bought food and drinks and they prepped the whole place and he had music going. He had everything all set up, furniture moved around. And only like 4 or 5 people showed up. And all guys too. That was what was kind of sad, even more so. Why didn't people come? Because they probably asked, are you going? Oh, you're not going? Oh, I'm not going. Of course I'm not going. I never even thought about it. Peer pressure, what other people might think. And here for Joseph of Arimathea, he's afraid of what the Jews might think. but yet he still takes the risk. And he goes and asks Pilate for the body. Someone might see him, someone might find out, but he still does go. And then we have Nicodemus, who's also afraid of what people might think. How do we know that? Because he's the guy that earlier in the Gospel of John goes to Jesus Christ at night because he doesn't want to be seen going into Jesus's place of residence in the daytime. And he goes at night and he asks, "Good teacher, I know you're from God," because no one could do and say the things that you're doing. So we have these two guys who actually end up burying Jesus and taking care of him, but they're afraid. To me, that's encouraging, because they're showing us how we also might overcome what other people might think of us, what might happen to us if we believe or follow or live out what we actually are passionate about, what might happen to us. And in taking the risk, you know what happens? It doesn't come out in this passage, but we do know that a few days later, they're going to be so blessed. You see, the 12 disciples that we knew that followed Jesus, the ones that were the closest one, out of which one was a traitor, all abandoned him, and none of them thought to ask for Jesus' body. None of them gave Jesus the honor, the dignity of saying, we're the ones that were closest, we don't care what anybody else thinks, we're his family, we're his friends, and we're the ones that are going to take care of him. Instead, they were all so caught up in their own grief, in their own disappointment, in their own fears, that they didn't even think about burying Jesus, giving him a decent burial. But instead, it's these two guys. And somehow they're able to overcome their fear. And might I suggest to you, it's not directly in this passage, but as we read the Word of God, as we think about what they did, that there's a few reasons why that they were able to. First off, Joseph. He's afraid of the Jews. He's afraid of what they might do to him. He's afraid of their thoughts towards him. But what keeps him? What allows him to be able to take this risk and overcome his fear? He might fear what might happen to him. Like, he might lose his wealth. He might lose his status, his position. But somehow, after sitting at the feet of Jesus and listening to him, being his disciple, it says that he was a disciple. John knew that this was a disciple of Jesus, someone who had followed. So even with all his doubt, he believed in the promises and the teaching of Jesus, and he didn't know how it was going to get all turned around. And Joseph was maybe a prototype. He was an archetype of all those people who had followed him but fell away, because what were they expecting Jesus to do? Do you guys know what all the Jews and all the people that were following expected Jesus to do? They thought he was going to be like King David or Moses. They thought he was going to come along and throw off the Roman government, raise up an army, and become a new king and set up a new kingdom of Israel that by miracles and by God's power would be able to defeat the overwhelmingly powerful Roman army with just a few. Just a handful. 300 maybe. 100 maybe. But by the power of God and with the miraculous power and with the angels on their side, they're going to be able to wipe out the Roman army or defeat them easily, so that people would say, wow, God is on your side. Your God is on your side. And that they would now be free to become a nation again, and that they would enthrone Jesus as the prophet, Messiah, King, whatever you want to call it. That's what they were expecting. And when Jesus dies, all of that goes out the door. But why is he able to come and take the body away and take this risk? Because he maybe is remembering things like Jesus saying, my kingdom is not of this world. Maybe he remembers things like, I'm going to have to die on the cross. That just like the snake was raised up in the desert. Do you guys know that? It comes out in the book of John. John remembers Jesus saying this, and a lot of the Jewish people of the day remember that. You know what the snake being raised up in the desert was? When Moses was leading the people out of Egypt into the promised land, they sinned because they kept bugging God about things that they didn't have. We want water, we want meat, we want this, we want that. And they kept complaining, and so God kept them wandering in the desert. And one time when they were saying, we want fresh water, we want all these things, and Moses got mad because these people were not trusting God after all the miracles. And God sent and said, you know what, I'm going to wipe out all the people, and I'm going to start up a new people of Israel through you, Moses, because you're the one that's faithful. And what happened is God sent as a punishment all these snakes out into the camp of the Israelites, and everybody was dead. And they were all dying of poisonous venom. And then Moses said, God, forgive them, please forgive them. And God said, okay, put up this golden snake up, a little bronze, a golden snake on a stick, and stick it up. And when people in faith, even though they're riding, come out of their tents and look at it, and they'll be healed. If not, they'll die. Kind of a weird thing to associate snake with Jesus, right? Because we think about Adam and Eve and Garden of Eden. But literally, it's the thing about that's the sin, and that sin will be crucified with Jesus on a stake, on a cross. And if you'll look up and realize God's grace, all you have to do is look up. There's nothing that you have to do. You don't have to repent. I mean, it's an action of repentance, but it's saying that I can't do this. I can't live. I'm dead without you. And in so doing. And so maybe Joseph remembered some of these things. And so he said, okay, maybe it's not the kingdom that I expected. Maybe it's something else. And as a result, he just said, okay, I'm going to just keep on following after Jesus, even though it doesn't seem to make sense. That's something I want to point out to you. You know when you have the greatest gain in anything? In a relationship, in studying, in any kind of skill, in any kind of habit? It's when you feel like you're at the low and everything's broken down. And it's at that point where you say, no, I'm going to keep going. And you go another step, and another step. And then all of a sudden, all the fruit of your labor, all the effort is rewarded. That's when it occurs. We're going to learn this from our own life experience. Now, maybe in a little more humorous way, it's like this, especially in terms of relationship, because definitely the Bible is talking about Joseph and Nicodemus' relationship with Jesus Christ. And that's what faith is about, our relationship with God. What happens oftentimes in relationships, not every relationship, but plenty, is that you go through all these phases. First off, when you meet one another and you have this, you hit it off. It could be a friend or it could be someone that you're going to marry, but you hit it off and you start going, wow, this is an amazing person. And then you get to know them and you start seeing their flaws. You're like, oh, okay, well, they're not that amazing. And, they bug you in different ways. And you go, oh, and then you go like, man, do I want to be in a relationship with this person? And maybe it becomes tenuous and maybe it comes to that place. But then sometimes something in the back of your mind goes, no, this person is worth continuing to have a relationship, flaws and everything. And when you continue on, that's when that relationship can blossom, because now you know all the good and you know all the bad. You've been through all the highs and you've been through all the lows. And as a result, when you go, then that lays the foundation for a phenomenal thing. And that's exactly what's going on with Joseph and with Nicodemus both. They went through the highs of seeing the miracles, of Jesus feeding the thousands, of healing, of raising up the dead, casting out demons, and now they're at the low where Jesus leaves them, seemingly, where all the promises seem to fall apart. And then they said, but where else am I going to go? To whom else can I put my faith? And so maybe in a very mournful way, Joseph gets that body and says, oh, what could have been, what could have been. He still honors and says, but there's something about you that was so special. Somehow, he's hoping beyond hope that God's promises will yet be fulfilled. Second part, when you look at Nicodemus, maybe it's a little bit different, but he's the one that has that encounter with Jesus earlier, where he comes from at the middle of the night. And the encounter goes somewhere like this: Jesus, I know you're from God. And Jesus says, you're right. And then he answers in a really strange way, you must be born again. He says, well, I just came and said you're from God. And then according to John, Jesus answers, you must be born again. Why? Because Jesus sees into the heart of Nicodemus. And Nicodemus' question was, how do I get to heaven? How do I make sure that God finds me acceptable? How do I be righteous and holy? Because you must be born again. And Nicodemus goes, well, wait a minute. How do you go back into your mother's womb? How do you get born again as a full-grown man? And Jesus says, you must be born of water and of the Spirit. And literally what he's talking about, and you can take it one way, water, the breaking of the water when a child is born, but literally what he's saying is you must be baptized. In other words, a step of obedience, and you must have the Holy Spirit convicting you in your heart, and that transformation has to happen. There must be a step of obedience, but before that there needs to be this internal transformation, and those two things signify that you've been sealed up for the kingdom of God. Well, in that same dialogue that Nicodemus has with Jesus, and that comes out of John chapter 3. This is the precursor to the most famous verse in the Bible, John 3:16, that you all know. And so what Jesus is saying is, you must be born again, all these kinds of things. He's saying, you're worried about what others think. That's why you came to me in the middle of the night, even though you knew I had to be from God, even though you knew and you believed that my words were true, you still came to me at night because you didn't want to be identified publicly with me. He's saying this, don't worry so much about what others think. Think about what God thinks about you. And then he says, when you must be born again, the famous passage, this is Jesus' word, he says, God loved this world so much. He loves you so much that he gave his only son to die on the cross for you. Do you understand that? And maybe Nicodemus remember that now. And so somewhere along the line, he's desiring to be accepted. He's desiring for approval from the peers. He's afraid of rejection, all these things. And now maybe he's being reminded that ultimately God will never leave you, never forsake you. That ultimately God loves you. And maybe he sees the glimmer of hope. That's why Jesus died. But now he doesn't know what's going to happen. He doesn't know about the resurrection yet. He's not sure about that quite yet. But he has this glimmer inside of his heart. See, Joseph may be going off on, I believe in the promises of God, that a kingdom of God will be established. And Nicodemus is also fleshing that out, saying, do you understand what Jesus does when he dies on the cross? It's a proclamation of his love. In 1 John chapter 4, verse 18, there is this amazing passage. This is the same John that writes this. He says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, for fear has to do with punishment. And whoever fears has not been perfected in love. And literally, John sums it up right there. And what he's saying is, if you know that you are loved and accepted by God, then you can overcome fear. You can overcome fear. Joseph and Nicodemus cling to this little shred of hope. And in doing so, their fear turns into faith. And a faith that later on is proven. And here's the thing that I love about this, because it's so true about me. I'm sure for a lot of you, we have very little faith. And when the Bible says act on, live upon your little faith, it means do what you know in your heart is right. Do, even if you're afraid, even if you still do it in the dark, even if you do it in private, still do the right things and continue to do the right things, because one day you'll become bold to do it out in public. You'll be able to do it out in front of everyone, because you will gain that confidence. That fear will be cast out. It's not getting rid of your fear that will now lead you to be able to have faith, but it's still clinging to faith in spite, in the midst of fear, that I find so encouraging in this passage. You know, you can look at it and say, man, all the disciples were afraid and ran away. Joseph comes in the middle of the night. Man, if it was me, I would have just gone in the broad daylight. Who cares? If it was me, if I would have been on Nicodemus and gone in the nighttime, I would have just done it out openly, defiantly. Now, it's easy to say that, but what's amazing is God doesn't reject these two. John puts it here saying, these two men did a very honorable and important thing in taking Jesus' body, preparing it for burial, very important thing, and putting it in the tomb. Even though their faith was little, even though they were full of fears. A lot of you guys might have a lot of fears. I don't know what you're going through. But the step of faith to just continue to trust God, to continue to come to church, to continue to read the Word, to continue to cling on. Say, God, I don't know about this theology. I don't know about this sin. I don't know if this is right. I don't know if that's wrong. But I'm going to take another step towards you. I'm going to cling on to you. And sometimes it's in ignorance, and sometimes it's without full knowledge. But that's how we grow. It's not quite blind faith, but it is faith that God can now take as a seed and cause to grow. I want to encourage all of you this morning. Oftentimes we fail to grasp how much God is rooting for us, how much Jesus loves us. And so I want to encourage you along that line. Jesus said this thing, almost like a parable, and it took me a long time to understand it, but he said, a bruised reed I'll not break. Right? You know what a bruised reed is? It's a little plant, and it's kind of like, going like this. And so it can live or it can break. And the amazing thing to me, lately I've been kind of forced to do some gardening. So I don't know if you've ever done this, but I'm not a gardener. I don't like doing this kind of thing, but I had to reseed part of my lawn. And I'm too cheap to get turf, just laid down, which is the easy way. So I'm putting seed in and putting compost on and watering it morning and night, every day, every morning, every day. My kids. And then you get to see this grass grow up. And it's amazing. You're like, oh my gosh. But the crazy thing is, and this is where all these agricultural parables, I have new insight into that. But you know what happens as soon as those grasses start growing? Tons of weeds pop up in between. And I'm literally on my hands and knees looking there, and I'm trying to grab each little tiny weed by itself and pull it out. You know why? Because I don't want weeds, I want all grass. But I'm so careful because I don't want to pull out any of those little grasses around it. And guess what? Pulling out a grass is so easy. The root and all come out. Pulling out a weed is super hard. I pull out a small weed that's that tall and the root's like this deep. But the grass is like just that deep and just pops out. And so I'm super careful pulling it out. And you know what I realized? From all the parables, a bruised reed he will not break, a bent reed he will not break. And you know how the weeds are, in between. And he says, I'm not going to pull the weeds out because we might pull out the grass. You know what that's talking about? It's talking about how little our faith is. And how carefully God is nurturing. What you have to understand is, God doesn't look at you and go, oh, why is your faith so little? Why are you such a tiny little grass? He doesn't look, he's excited about that. He continues to water and nurture it. And looking forward to the day when you're strong and able to stand. Do not despise the day of small beginnings. Do not despise them. I want to encourage you. Joseph and Nicodemus, John puts it in there saying, hey, start here. This is actually arguably the first folks that are actually able to come into contact with faith after his death, before his resurrection. For that, we should be thankful. May we too also grab a hold of that. Overcome your fear, and overcome your fear by faith in the love that Jesus has for you. Let's pray together this morning. Heavenly Father, I want to thank you again. I just pray that you would remind us that even the little faith that we have, as long as we move forward, and even in the midst of doubt, sorrow, discouragement, we just say, Lord, there's nowhere else to go. And I'm just going to hold on to you. As we do that, cause our faith to be nurtured, to grow. And as we look forward to the resurrection, as we look forward to that, even in our lives, may that miracle just amaze us. Maybe it'll catch us by surprise, but help each person to grow in that. We thank you so much this week. And now, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and grant you peace. May the Lord turn his face towards you may your faith blossom. Be with all those that are gathered here this week. We pray to bless them in Jesus' precious name. Amen. God bless. Let's go ahead and greet one another this morning. Let's have table. Let's have lunch. Let's enjoy this day in God. God bless.
Hola.